According to the native North Americans who live in the Pacific Northwest, once upon a time the world was dark, and all the inhabitants had to live their lives feeling their way along, making life really difficult, really challenging, stumbling and falling, hurting themselves, and not getting all that they could out of life. Well, Raven, being such a clever guy, had been listening to rumors for a long time. And he heard a rumor that somewhere through the smoke hole in the top of the lodge of the universe, the old man lived whose job it was to place all the ornaments in the universe. And there was a special ornament that the old man loved more than any other ornament. It was light, it was illumination, it was something called the sun. He loved it so much he couldn't bear to part with it, so he kept it in a cedar box. So one day Raven took it upon himself to fly straight up as far as he could, to go through the smoke hole in the top of the lodge of the universe. And finally he came within eyesight where he could barely see it, and he took his way through it, even though he was afraid as to what he would find on the other side of it. He broke through the smoke hole, and suddenly he came into another lodge that was lightly lit and warm and beautiful. And he looked around and he saw in the corner the old man sitting on a throne that was carved in cedar, a beautiful throne surrounded by cedar boxes. And Raven noticed that the entire room was being illumined from the light that was contained within the cedar box. Even though it was in a cedar box, it was so full of light, it poured out into the room. It poured out into the lodge. The old man was surrounded by his family, and he was surrounded by very close friends. And Raven began to make his way to the old man, and he was grabbed by one of his friends and said, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "Well, I'm here to see if I can get the light, if I can get the sun, if I can get the illumination from the old man." He said, "There's no way you'll be able to do that. He loves that more than anything that he owns, and he will not give it up." So Raven thought for a moment, and he watched what was going on, and he watched the way that the old man interacted with his family, how much he loved his children, especially his daughter, his grown daughter. And so Raven, being a very, very smart person, a very, very smart character, decided that the only thing he could use is trickery and deceit. And see, Raven is a shapeshifter. So he pulled one of his black feathers and he did an incantation, and using all kinds of trickery, he inhabited the daughter of the old man and posed as a baby that she gave birth to, the grandchild of the old man. He came out, and Raven began to endear himself to the old man. He began to want to be snuggled and loved and held, and he would kiss the old man and play in his lap, and the old man began to just love him more than anything in the world. So finally, when Raven was old enough to pose as talking, he asked the old man if he could see what was in his cedar boxes. And so one at a time, the old man opened up the cedar boxes and showed him the various treasures of the universe. And finally he asked to see the cedar box with the illumination coming from it. And the old man said, "Oh no, I can't possibly show you that. That is my greatest treasure. That is my greatest gift." So Raven began to cry as the baby. And he began to say, "If you really loved me, you would show me your greatest gift." And in doing so, he broke the old man's heart. And so the old man finally succumbed and opened the cedar box and showed Raven this beautiful round globe, the sun, the illumination. He handed it to Raven, thinking it was his grandchild. And at that moment, Raven turned back into Raven, took the sun in his mouth, and went through the smoke hole and brought it to the world. He brought it down and he illumined the world. But the old man was so sad that he began to cry. And his tears became the weather that is known in the Pacific Northwest, gray and rainy and wet. So Raven returned to his people, triumphant because he had allowed the sun to come into the world. But they gave Raven a hard time because they said, because of your conceit and trickery, how can we really enjoy the sun? And Raven said, sometimes you just can't win. You know what I'm saying? I do this great thing. They don't like the weather. What can I say? Within this story are all kinds of ideas. What I love about the story is that it acknowledges that we as spirits of God, we as individuals, as unique spirits of God, we have been given this thing called intelligence. And no matter how we use it, it's about what we do in the end with it. In the end, Raven was able to illuminate the world by using this incredible intelligence. Once a year, in areas of the Pacific Northwest, there are tribes who live along the ocean. And I think it's about this time of year. They do a dance that reenacts the story I just told you. And a dancer will put on one of the beautiful cedar masks that we know from the Pacific Northwest, the beautiful carving of the raven, painted black with all kinds of other wonderful colors that contrast that. Sometimes the mask is as long as 3 feet in terms of the beak. It's a very heavy mask, has feathers on it. The dancer dresses himself in black and wears feathers. A contemporary dancer talked about the idea of what he does to prepare himself to play the raven in this dance. He says, first of all, he goes out and he watches the ravens that are around him in the forest. The way they cock their heads, the way they exhibit their intelligence, the way they communicate, the way that a raven, unlike a lot of other birds, will look you right in the eye. The way that a raven is not easily frightened. The way that a raven makes its way in the world with bold contempt for any kind of authority. A car, a person, an animal. It waits till the very last minute before it moves on. And when it moves on, it sort of lets you know that as soon as you turn your back, it will be back. The dancer says that in that way, by watching the raven, he begins to recognize the oneness of spirit, the intelligence that inhabits all of the children of God that we share this world with. Then the dancer begins to wonder what it's like to be willing to go on that scary journey to the unknown, to bring something back to its people, to love its people so much it's willing to make that journey, that selfless giving. So he begins to embody that. He begins to imagine that. And then he imagines what it is to be involved in the trickery and the deceit. Because he loves his people so much, he will use his intelligence in any way that he can. He wonders, he begins to inhabit the idea, much like a method actor, thinking about what it is to interact with this old man, the man who keeps all of the treasures of the universe. And how much he wants that one treasure so much for his people, for his own family, for his loved ones. And then to finally bring it back, and especially when they do the dance, the first couple rows are filled with little kids whose eyes are just going wild over seeing the raven do his dance. And he wonders what it's like to truly bring the sun, the light back, especially to those little kids. And then he begins to inhabit that idea of what it is to do the very best you can simply to sometimes disappoint those around you. So a contemporary dancer who was asked about what it's like, he said, he says, I can't help but do this dance and prepare for this dance without it coming and touching my own life. becoming aware of what it is that I can bring to my people, my family, my friends. What can I bring forth? What can I bring forth from a place that's maybe even kind of scary? How can I use my intelligence? How can I look out into the world and see the intelligence around me that inhabits the raven, that inhabits everything? And so the contemporary dancer says, when I do the dance of the raven, by the time I'm done, I'm doing the dance of myself. And I recognize all of the gifts that the dance has given me. In this time of year, I know that there are sometimes mixed feelings about going into this time of year. Some of us have been through different experiences. Some of us may find ourselves in a new experience that may not be as great as we want it to be. We're surrounded by what used to be called the Norman Rockwell images. I don't know, that's sort of passé now, but some kind of all the media images of the way things should be. The movies, the TV specials, the Hallmark Channel. We're surrounded by that. And so this can be a challenging time of year, but ultimately this is a beautiful time of year. Because the mythology I just told you is one of many mythologies about the idea of light, bringing light forward. And like the dancer, what we know is that we have the opportunity to enter into this year, to take the flight that we want to take, to engage in bringing forth the light in the way that we want to bring it forward. Even sometimes if it takes being pretty brave, or maybe misunderstood by other people, but to be willing to bring the light forward. Now, I'm not one to argue the validity of any mythology. The word mythology simply means some sort of spiritual story that comes down to us through the ages. So for all I know, there was a raven and there was an old man. Just like for all I know that there is a Santa Claus. I like to think there's a Santa Claus. Wearing a lot of red today, you may be thinking of Santa Claus right now with the way that I'm built. I remember years ago, my children were really little, and I have 3 children, and they were so little I only had 2 at this time, and they were about 2 and 5, because my sons are 3 years apart. My sons are the 2 oldest. So they were about 2 and 5. And it was one of those times, it was one of those Christmas seasons where I was not where I wanted to be in that time. Relationship, finances, on a lot of different levels. So I had, like us all, I had the Norman Rockwell Christmas around me. I had the media. I didn't have the Hallmark Channel. I'm really glad for that. But I had the other stuff. I think I had the Brady Christmas or something. I don't know. And so I looked at my children, and it was hard for me to look at my children at that time because I don't think that they were experiencing the life that they wanted to experience. It's one thing to be your bad self or to do your thing, but when you do it in front of your kids, sometimes that's really challenging. So I really wanted to do something special for them. And now I know that, Santa Claus living on the North Pole, he can't possibly cover the whole waterfront. You know what I'm saying? He can't cover all the office parties, can't cover all the malls. And that's where the Santa Clauses who step into the metaphor of Santa Claus come forward. And they fill in for him. Well, the law of attraction being what it is, I ran into a guy who was a person who filled in for Santa Claus. He was a professional Santa Claus, and he went to malls, and he went to office parties, and he went to hospitals, he did other things, and he had really great costumes and gear. He had good Santa gear. He didn't have the kind of gear that you find, that you can pick up, God bless him, like Walmart or something. I don't mean anything against him, but he had the good stuff. He had the really good beard, he had the really good costume. He had a lot of this stuff over the years, because he did this every year. I was talking to him, and I was telling him, oh my God, I would love to have my kids experience Santa in their home. He said, hey, I got a bunch of stuff I can give you if you want to do that. So I thought about it, and I thought, wow, that's amazing. And so, and again, I'm doing this for the kids, right? So I got some gear from him. In the course of the few weeks leading up to Christmas, Christmas Eve, we had a couple other couples that we knew who had kids the same age. There was one couple who had one kid right in between my two sons. Another couple had 3 children right around that same age. So we're talking kids who are no more than, say, 6 years old or whatever. And so they all thought it was great. Oh my God, can you come by? And I was going to do the whole New Year's Eve thing. So I was going to put on the stuff. I was going to get in my little blue VW with one burned out headlight and the muffler hanging off the back, and hope that a cop didn't pull Santa over. And so I did it, and I went into, I started out with one place, and I went in, and I even got myself a red pipe, to smoke tobacco. I was a smoker, but I didn't smoke pipes. At least tobacco I didn't smoke. So anyway, it'll take you a minute to catch up to that. So I had this red pipe. And I got the tobacco and the whole thing, and I walked in and I did my thing, and so I would, they made sure the lights were low, my back was to them, had the pipe going, and I could hear the kids come out really quietly, and I did my thing. I could hear them almost, they couldn't even hardly breathe, it was so wonderful. So I did my thing, and I got back in my little blue sleigh from Germany. Mine was probably made in Brazil, but then I went to the next place and did the same thing. And so the last place was going to be my home. And so I came in, and it was arranged to get the boys up when I came in, and now that one was trickier, so I really had to watch it, and of course I had a lot of padding. Back then I was kind of thin, believe it or not. Had a lot of padding, had the costume, had the pipe, had the whole thing going on. And again, I could hear them behind me in the room, in the dark room. And one of them said, "Oh my God, where's Dad?" "Oh, well, Dad, Dad couldn't wake up. Don't worry about that, And I just stood there, and it was amazing to me, listening to their little breath, and out of the corner of my eye, seeing those little pajamas with the feet in them and stuff, and there, Now, I started this whole thing for them, right? But what was amazing, and I know this is the corniest thing in the world, but it's just so true, is that I was the one at the end of the evening that got the gift. Because like the dancer, it was about bringing light to my people. Metaphor, the images of whatever it is, and this season is filled with images. Metaphor speaks to us in terms of what it pulls out from that deeper place. Like the dancer who pulls up his inner raven, like me who pulls up the inner Santa Claus. It's about, I discovered something in myself that night. And when I look at the next few years, the way that my life began to take a different direction, I really put a lot of it back on that night. Because it brought something up very special from within. It brought up a potentiality. It brought up, for lack of a better term, the self-esteem of willing to do something that was courageous and loving, and knowing that I was capable of that, because I don't know how much I knew I was capable of that before that time. This season is filled with the metaphor of giving. The reason that so many cultures and tribes have stories around the light is because this season, being where it is when things are cold and dark and the days are shorter, this sort of metaphorically represents that time of maybe a little bit of depression, that time of not feeling quite dialed in. And we bring forward light. We bring forward light. Who brings forward light? We do. We have the option to do that. Whether we're a raven or whether we're a Santa Claus or whether we're a virgin giving birth, we bring forth light. That's what it means. And the question is, how do we step into that place of bringing forth light? Of bringing something up that is deep within us. The metaphors are only for things that are already there. Joseph Campbell said to illuminate like a stained glass window. Like a stained glass window.